Hi class. Today we are going to revisit the focus question about chemical and physical changes, and we're going to review a little bit in your chapter 9 packet, and then you have a quiz to take. So first of all, in your science notebook, you wrote this question: what are chemical and physical changes? And today we're going to answer the question, talk about what they are, and then you'll take your quiz. So first of all, a chemical change, and we saw this happen yesterday in the lab, a chemical change transforms a substance into another substance. The atoms rearrange. The atoms actually don't stay attached to what they were attached to before. They rearrange themselves. It's like when you know what it's like? It's like one of those dances. I don't know what it's called.
TikTok.
No, it's not TikTok. It's one of those dances where you are like two people start out, and then those two people, the DJ stops the music or says change or whatever, and then they go pick new people, and then he says change, and then they go pick new people. Do you remember what that's called?
Like musical chairs, but musical partners.
Yeah, but it's called something, but I don't know what it's called. Anyway, it's like that. So the original pair is paired up, and then they detach from each other, and then attach to someone else or something else. And then those come apart and go attached to something else. So the pairs never look the same. And that's what a chemical change is. It transforms the original substance into a completely different substance. It's kind of like when you have sodium and chlorine. Sodium is a really flammable powdery solid in its natural form, and chlorine is a poisonous gas. Okay, chlorine, like you put in the pool when it's a liquid form, and sodium you don't want to mess with, and chlorine you really don't want to mess with, but when you put them together they form NaCl, which is just salt, table salt. Put it on your fries. So they can be completely, totally different substances, and they also can have completely, totally different characteristics. They can do totally different things. Like you would never drink chlorine, you would never eat sodium, but you eat salt every day. And those are those two things combined. Okay, a physical change doesn't transform the substance into something else. The atoms stay put. So it's like progressive dance. Maybe that's what it's called. Progressive dance? Anyway, the original couple maybe stays the original couple. Maybe they go out and choose two other people, and those two people dance, but the original couple stays and dances together. And then the DJ says,
My elbow's falling.
oh, sorry. Control yourself. So anyway, the original thing stays the original thing. It might look different. If you think about ice. Ice is H2O. Ice is hard and cold and solid. And when ice melts, it becomes liquid water. So it goes from a solid to a liquid. It's still H2O. It looks different, but it's still the same thing. It did not change from one substance into another substance. So changes of state, solid, liquid, gas, plasma, those are all physical changes. But when it changes into something else completely, that's a chemical change. And that's your focus question. Now, I don't have to wait for you to write this down, because you can just pause.
Pause.
Here, I'll give you a good pause scene.
Pause.
Pause. No, I'll give you a really good pause scene. Okay, yeah, so you look at me like I usually am. Okay, so anyway, now that we're back, because you finished writing that down. I'm going to go through the terms in here. Chemical reaction is the process when one substance changes into another substance. So the chemical reaction produces a chemical change. Reactants and products. The reactants are what you start with. The products are what you end up with. So if you start with sodium and chlorine, you end up with salt. Sodium is a reactant. Chlorine is a reactant. You chemically combine them. The product is salt. So basically, it usually reads like a math equation where you put the things you're working with on the left side equals the things you're working with on the right side. So you have the reactants, and the products. Sometimes it can go back and forth. So it just depends on which way the arrow is pointing. On page 2, also we have a solid substance that forms in a liquid. That solid that forms is called a precipitate, and we're going to do a lab on that, I think, next week, a precipitate. Maybe later this week we'll do the precipitate. But it's like when you combine 2 liquids and you get a solid. That's a precipitate, and that's pretty cool. And other signs that a chemical reaction has taken place are that the substance changed color, like when an apple turns brown, that's a chemical reaction. A gas is produced. The lab we just did, all the bubbles, those had gas in them. Precipitate, that's when you get a solid. We haven't seen that yet. And temperature change, the lab that we did yesterday was warmer. That produced that was a chemical reaction. And those things don't always indicate a chemical change because, for example, yesterday's lab, I added food coloring to the hydrogen peroxide. Oh, that's a color change, right? That's a chemical reaction. No, it was just food coloring in hydrogen peroxide. It wasn't a chemical change. So these things are just indicators that a chemical change has happened, but not always for sure. Okay. And the 3 types of chemical reactions are synthesis. That's when you take some things and put them together and you get a more complicated thing. Usually you take some simple things like sodium and chlorine and you put them together chemically or energy wise, and you get something more complicated, sodium chloride. That is a synthesis reaction. And then the decomposition reaction is
like me, decomposed.
Yeah, decomposing. Yes, you've already done that, Ross. So decomposition is when you start out with something that's complicated and break it down into something simpler. So, for example, the example they give in your packet is that you start with water and then you can do electrolysis to break it down and turn it into just hydrogen and just oxygen. That's decomposition. Combustion means, yes, very good, Ross. Combustion means burning. So anytime there's a combustion reaction, something is hot, something is fire, something is warm, something's burning. And in order for that to happen, oxygen always has to be one of the reactants. You can't burn something without oxygen. So as long as oxygen's a reactant, it could be a combustion reaction. It doesn't have to be, but in order for it to be a combustion reaction, it has to start with oxygen. That's one of the reactants. And then the last thing on page 5, again, the catalyst, we just did that yesterday, the lab. So the catalyst is the thing that gets it going. Remember I held up the water bottle and it had the hydrogen peroxide in it, and it had the food coloring in it, and it was just sitting there, not doing anything. Then I added the yeast, and all of a sudden we get the bubbles, and then it came out, and that was the catalyst. The yeast was the catalyst. Because there was still yeast in there. Like you could see the yeast on the side of the bottle, and when I cleaned it out, I poured it out, and there were chunks of yeast in the sink. So the yeast didn't actually get consumed in the reaction. It just made it happen. That's what a catalyst does.
North, south, east, west.
So, as of the end of the day today, Tuesday, you should have pages 1 through 5 read, notes taken, and completed all the questions. You should also have your lab write-up done, your lab write-up done for the catalyst lab, including the conclusion. You should have your focus question done in your science notebook, and you may use your notes, you may use all of the stuff that you've done so far to take the quiz. It says 9-1 section quiz, and you can either print it out and do it on a piece of paper, or you can just do the questions in your science notebook. You don't have to write the questions down in your science notebook. You can just write your answers. But be sure you number them so we know which one you meant when you answered it. And that's all we have for today. I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we start section 9.2, I think. Do some reading and stuff. And see you tomorrow. I love you. Bye.
Show them my beautiful smile. Please.
You want to take the mask off? You're being daring. You want to take the mask off.
I love you too.